Have you ever found yourself just totally trapped in a relationship with someone who appeared incredibly vulnerable at first?
Right. Someone who seemed kind, soft-spoken, maybe even a little fragile when you first met them.
Exactly. They seem like someone you're, uniquely equipped to help or understand. Like you can finally offer them a safe harbor.
But then, almost imperceptibly, the gravity in the room just shifted.
Yeah. And you found yourself constantly apologizing. You started walking on eggshells in your own home, and your energy, like your literal life force, just seemed to drain away day by day.
Leaving you dizzy, exhausted, and honestly questioning your own sanity.
If you are nodding your head right now or feeling that familiar knot in your stomach, you are not alone. And more importantly, you are not crazy.
Absolutely not. That experience, that slow, suffocating confusion where you feel like you're losing your grip on reality while simultaneously trying to save someone else, is actually a highly documented psychological dynamic.
Right, and that's our mission for this deep dive today. We're looking at a huge stack of clinical psychology papers, trauma recovery frameworks, and some truly fascinating neuroscience to figure out exactly how two people get locked into this cycle.
We're unpacking what the clinical literature calls the dialectical ecology of trauma.
Dialectical ecology of trauma. I mean, that sounds super dense, but it's really about an ecosystem, right?
It is. We're talking about how two completely different sets of childhood wounds fit together perfectly, like a lock and a key.
Yeah, the fatal magnetic attraction between the highly empathic person and the covert narcissist. And we're going to get into some really paradigm-shifting territory today that might completely upend how you view your past or even your present relationships.
Because we have to ask some deeply uncomfortable questions here.
We do. Like, what if your deep, beautiful empathy isn't just a genetic gift, but actually a highly tuned trauma response?
What if the narcissist you are running from is, in a very bizarre way, a mirror of your own unhealed childhood wounds?
It's an incredibly provocative premise. Um, but the research points us right there. This isn't an accidental pairing where you just had a run of bad luck on a dating app.
No, not at all. It is a highly organized pathological system. The defensive pathology of one partner perfectly satisfies and exploits the psychological vulnerabilities of the other.
So let's start by looking at who we are actually dealing with. If you're familiar with psychology at all, you already know the classic image of a narcissist.
Right, the loud, grandiose, attention-seeking person dominating the boardroom or obsessed with their reflection. The overt narcissist.
Exactly. But the literature we're diving into today focuses on a much more insidious presentation, the covert or vulnerable narcissist.
And this person completely slips under the radar because they look like the exact opposite of what we expect.
They really do. I mean, the covert narcissist is often introverted. They might be shy, socially anxious, highly self-deprecating.
They present to the world as the nice guy or the sweet, misunderstood girl. They might even label themselves as an empath or a highly sensitive person.
Wow, so they actually co-opt the language of the victim.
Exactly. But to understand the danger here, we have to look beneath that presentation to the unconscious psychological mechanism at play.
Which is the construction of the false self.
Yes, the false self. According to the developmental psychology frameworks in our research, the covert narcissist almost always suffered profound early childhood trauma.
Like overt abuse or severe neglect.
It could be that, or very commonly, highly inconsistent conditional messaging from their caregivers. They were taught very early on that their authentic, vulnerable self was simply unacceptable.
So it was fundamentally unsafe to be who they truly were.
Right. And that creates an unbearable, agonizing core of toxic shame and extremely low self-worth.
I mean, a child can't survive believing they are fundamentally unlovable, right? So they have to invent a version of themselves that can survive.
Exactly. They build a fortress made of smoke and mirrors. They build this false self.
But here is the critical emotional need driving it, according to the sources. This false self possesses the exact same grandiosity and entitlement as the loud, overt narcissist you see in the movies.
The difference is entirely in the delivery system. The grandiosity is internalized.
So they hold on to these elaborate fantasies where they see themselves as inherently superior, intellectually or morally above everyone else.
But they believe they are uniquely victimized and misunderstood by a cruel, unappreciative world.
Okay, hold on. That doesn't make intuitive sense to me. If they have this agonizing core of toxic shame and they legitimately hate themselves underneath it all, how can you call them a narcissist?
That is the single biggest misconception about narcissism, and it's exactly why covert narcissists get away with so much.
Because isn't the whole definition of narcissism that you love yourself too much?
No, actually, narcissism is almost never about true self-love. True self-love allows for accountability and growth.
Oh, wow. So what is it then?
Narcissism is a rigid defense mechanism against deep self-loathing. Think of it as a compensatory shell.
So in the covert narcissist, their contempt for others is pervasive.
Pervasive. They are constantly scanning a room, comparing themselves to others, experiencing chronic envy, and feeling a quiet, simmering internal superiority.
But if they feel so superior, why don't they just act like the overt narcissist and demand everyone's attention?
Because they are absolutely terrified, they are hypersensitive to criticism and paralyzed by the fear of rejection.
Oh, I see. So if an overt narcissist demands the spotlight and fails, they just get angry and blame the audience.
Right. But if a covert narcissist demands the spotlight and fails, it penetrates their armor and triggers that agonizing core of toxic shame.
It would psychologically crush them.
Exactly. So they use introversion and perceived humility as a shield. Their superiority is entirely defensive.
They just sit on the sidelines, harboring deep resentment, playing the victim of circumstance.
Yes. They feel entitled to special treatment simply for existing and enduring their unique suffering.
That makes so much sense, but imagine how confusing that is for the person trying to love them. You're interacting with someone who constantly puts themselves down.
Someone who seems anxious, who positions themselves as the perpetual victim of bad bosses, crazy exes, unfair situations.
Right. And your instinct, especially if you are a highly empathic person, is to rush in and nurture them. You want to heal them.
And that instinct plunges the victim into intense cognitive dissonance. The empath constantly feels like they are failing a fragile partner.
You see the self-deprecating comments and the apparent vulnerability, and you think, if I just love them hard enough, if I'm just patient enough, they will finally feel safe.
You think their true, happy self will emerge, but you are completely unaware that you are interacting with a heavily armored, manipulative, false self.
There is no true self waiting to be loved back to health.
None. You end up pouring all your energy, your love, your finances, your time into a bottomless pit.
You think you're providing medicine, but you're actually just providing narcissistic supply.
Exactly. The attention, validation, and emotional reaction that the false self needs to sustain its illusion.
And it has no intention of ever getting better, because being the victim is literally how it gets its power.
Which brings us to how this power is actually wielded. Because if the abuse is an explosive rage...
Right. If they aren't screaming at you or throwing plates, how do they control the environment?
The sources outline a very specific architecture of covert abuse. It's control through subtle absence and weaponized passive aggression.
Yeah, the covert narcissist cannot risk an overt, loud confrontation because a direct, rational argument means facts will be checked and they might be proven wrong.
And being proven wrong triggers the shame core. So they deploy a strategy that clinical literature describes as death by 1,000 cuts.
Death by 1,000 cuts. It is a systematic process of punishing and minimizing their partner in ways that leave no visible bruises.
Let's walk through some of the specific tactics the research highlights, because if you are listening, this is where the light bulbs are going to start flashing.
Yeah, the foundational tactic is withholding. Withholding affection, withholding praise, and withholding the truth by lying by omission.
We have to look at the work of manipulation experts like Dr. George Simon and researchers like Shahida Arabi here. Withholding is not just someone needing space after a long day.
No, it's used strategically and sadistically to instill deep insecurity. It relies on intermittent reinforcement.
The covert narcissist might be incredibly warm, attentive, and seemingly deeply in love with you one day.
Then the next day, for absolutely no discernible reason, they are completely emotionally absent.
It's crazy making. You're analyzing everything you said over the last 48 hours, trying to figure out what you did wrong.
That's the goal. Furthermore, they will strategically withhold healthy interest or genuine compliments precisely when they are warranted.
Right. Say you get a major promotion at work or you accomplish a huge personal goal. A healthy partner celebrates that.
But a covert narcissist might fail to acknowledge it entirely, or they'll subtly change the subject to a minor inconvenience they experienced that day.
Or, even more damaging, they will engage in triangulation. They will lavish praise on someone else right in front of you.
Specifically to make you feel invisible and less than. And when you try to bring up how much that hurts, You hit the next tactic, which is the silent treatment and stonewalling.
You say, hey, it really hurt my feelings when you ignored my promotion and spent dinner talking about your coworker, and they just...
They just look at you. Or they walk out of the room, they completely refuse to engage.
And one of the most fascinating things in the research is that experiencing the silent treatment actually activates the exact same area of the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, that registers physical pain.
That is wild. It's not just annoying. To your brain, it is literally agonizing.
It's agonizing because it is a profound, nonverbal assertion of absolute power. By refusing to engage, they completely control the narrative and instantly escape all accountability.
You cannot resolve an issue, you cannot find closure, and you cannot feel safe if the other person simply unplugs the connection.
It leaves the victim's nervous system in a state of suspended panic.
The sources also give some chilling, real-world examples of how dark this gets, specifically with a tactic called withholding care.
Yes. There's a case study mentioned about a woman named Susan who had a covert narcissistic husband named Harry.
Susan has major surgery. She's literally waking up from anesthesia. She's physically incapacitated, vulnerable, in pain.
And Harry chooses that exact moment to confront her about her supposedly bad behavior and becomes overtly hostile.
Or there's another example of a woman named Rebecca, whose father would become intensely moody, irritable, and angry whenever she was sick as a child.
Making her feel like her illness was this massive, offensive inconvenience to his life.
That is a classic defining hallmark of the covert presentation. Think about the hidden emotional need there.
A covert narcissist views your illness, your vulnerability, or your moments of need as a direct threat.
Why? Because it takes the attention the narcissistic supply off of them.
Furthermore, because they lack effective empathy, which is the ability to physically feel and resonate with another's distress, your pain doesn't move them.
It just annoys them. So they punish you for it. They punish you for needing something they are incapable of giving.
They also have a radar for joy, and they know exactly how to ruin it. The tactic is called spoiling joy.
The papers detail a story of a woman named Tanya. It's the night before her massive 40th birthday party, something she's been planning and excited about for months.
Her partner decides to go out the night before, stays out all night, and shows up the next day to her party incredibly hungover.
Barely speaking, just sulking in the corner the entire time.
Look at the psychological utility of what he did. By sulking, he successfully shifted the emotional gravity of the entire room back to himself.
Right. Tanya spends her birthday anxious, checking on him, making excuses for him to her friends.
He gets the supply, and he maintains plausible deniability.
Because if Tanya confronts him the next day, he won't yell. He'll just look wounded and say, I told you I was feeling sick. Why are you making my illness about you? You are so demanding and selfish.
It's flawless gaslighting. It completely makes you question your own reality.
I like to think of it like a slow carbon monoxide leak in your house. If someone comes into your house and starts smashing the windows with a baseball bat, that's overt abuse.
You see it, you call the police, you leave.
But covert abuse is the carbon monoxide leak. You don't see the poison, there's no dramatic explosion.
You just know you are constantly suffocating, you feel dizzy, your memory's slipping, you think you're losing your mind.
And the narcissist is sitting there comfortably on the couch, convincing you that the air is fine and you're just the one who forgot how to breathe.
That analogy captures the insidious nature of it perfectly, because with carbon monoxide, your body is shutting down, but your conscious mind doesn't know why.
But let's build on that analogy,
Yeah.
because it brings up the debate that researchers have been having for decades. Is the narcissist turning on the gas intentionally?
Are they actively plotting in a dark room, rubbing their hands together, thinking, how can I destroy Tanya's birthday?
Right. That's the question every victim asks. Do they know what they're doing?
The clinical consensus is that it is a complex mix. It is part conscious, calculated manipulation to maintain control, and part deeply ingrained automatic survival mechanism.
Dr. Simon calls this denial, coupled with rationalization. The narcissist's brain instantly rationalizes their cruel behavior to protect their fragile ego.
Tanya's partner truly convinces himself in that moment that he is the victim of a hangover and a demanding girlfriend.
They use your own empathy, your own tendency to look for the good in people, to solidify their false narrative.
Okay, so if the abuse is this subtle, this draining, and this confusing, a normal person might stick around for a few months, realize they feel terrible, and just walk away.
So why doesn't the empath? What is physically happening in the empath's brain that keeps them trapped in a house filled with carbon monoxide?
Let's strip away the mystical, almost magical terminology that usually gets associated with being an empath. I want to look at the hard neuroscience of empathic susceptibility.
This is where the story gets really compelling. Because empathy is not just a personality trait or a spiritual aura, it is a very specific set of neural processes.
And to understand why the empath stays, we have to look at the mirror neuron system. Mirror neurons are specialized brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you witness someone else perform that exact same action.
So if I'm watching you cook and you accidentally slice your finger with a knife, my brain literally runs a rapid neural simulation of my own finger being sliced.
Precisely. That is called embodied simulation. In a neurotypical brain, this system works perfectly to help us understand another person's physical or emotional pain so we can respond appropriately.
But the fMRI research shows us that in a highly empathic person, this mirror neuron system is drastically hyperactive.
Right. When they observe someone in distress, even subtle nonverbal distress, it triggers a massive neural cascade.
The insula, a region deep in the brain, maps that observe pain directly onto their own visceral bodily landscape.
Then, the anterior cingulate cortex takes that data and generates the actual subjective feeling of shared distress.
Meaning they don't just feel sorry for the person, they experience emotional contagion.
They literally absorb the other person's anxiety, shame, or sadness into their own central nervous system.
The sources describe it as walking through the world without emotional skin. You walk into a room and you just absorb the emotional temperature of whoever is there.
Yes, and this is the hidden truth about empathy that often challenges how people view themselves. Our culture tends to romanticize high sensitivity.
We treat it as an innate, beautiful, almost spiritual gift.
And while it is beautiful, the clinical literature, specifically the work of Dr. Kenny Weiss and Dr. Elaine Aron, suggests something much more profound and, frankly, much more painful about its origins.
The story of Dr. Elaine Aron in the research absolutely blew my mind. She is a clinical psychologist, and she's basically the godmother of the highly sensitive person concept. She literally wrote the book on it.
Yes, her work is foundational.
In a documentary about her work, she tells a story about her childhood, trying to learn how to swim. Her parents were standing at the edge of the pool, and they were absolutely terrified of the water.
But more than that, they were filled with the shame and anxiety of potentially being judged as bad parents if something happened to her.
Exactly. So as she is a little kid just trying to paddle around, they are projecting all this panic onto her, screaming, "Don't go near the deep end, don't drown, be careful."
Look at what is happening in that family system. That is a profound failure of emotional attunement.
Her parents were so flooded by their own unprocessed fear and toxic shame that they couldn't be a calm, safe mirror for their child. They couldn't regulate themselves.
Right. So what did her child brain do to survive? She regulated them. She absorbed all of their fear. She absorbed their shame.
It bypassed her logic and went directly into her developing nervous system.
And the revelation here, and if you identify as an empath, this might be a tough pill to swallow, is that much of what we label as a gift of sensitivity is actually a deeply conditioned trauma response.
You weren't necessarily born with a magical ability to read minds. You were likely a child in a chaotic, unpredictable, or emotionally volatile environment.
That is the crux of it. Children in those environments have to develop hypervigilance simply to survive.
If your caregiver is emotionally volatile, depressive, explosive, or even just constantly anxious, your brain adapts. It extracts patterns from their microexpressions.
You train yourself over thousands of hours to pick up on the absolute earliest, most subtle biological signals of your caregiver's changing mood.
You're constantly thinking, is mom's jaw clenching? Is dad's breathing changing? Are they about to explode? Are they about to withdraw love?
This extreme other-directedness, this obsession with the emotional states of the people around you becomes your primary survival strategy.
It is an absolute superpower when you are a 7-year-old trying to navigate a scary house. You make yourself a highly tuned radar dish to anticipate the danger and try to fix it before it hits you.
But as an adult, 20 or 30 years later, that hyperactive mirror neuron system is still running at maximum capacity. The radar dish is still spinning.
You are still absorbing everyone's pain, trying to fix them so you can feel safe.
And this brings up a really crucial distinction the sources make between affective empathy and cognitive empathy.
This differentiation is vital if we want to understand the trap, right?
Yes. Affective empathy is what the empath has an overwhelming excess of. It is that physical, visceral, embodied feeling of what others feel. It's the emotional contagion.
Cognitive empathy, on the other hand, is the ability to logically, intellectually understand what someone else is thinking or feeling without necessarily absorbing the emotion into your own body.
It's perspective taking. And cognitive empathy recruits entirely different brain regions, like the temporoparietal junction and the medial prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
It's analytical, not emotional.
So the empath is drowning in effective empathy. They feel everything. Now let's look at what happens when that hyper-vigilant radar dish scans a room and locks onto a covert narcissist.
This is the fatal attraction. Ross Rosenberg calls it the human magnet syndrome. Why do these two specific archetypes attract each other with such devastating intensity?
Because it is a perfect interlocking trauma schema. Both individuals are entering the relationship with profound, unhealed childhood wounds.
But they have developed diametrically opposed survival personas to manage that exact same pain.
All right, I have to stop you here, because this is the part of the research that feels like a gut punch.
It really is.
It is so easy and frankly so comforting to read the articles online and conclude the empath is the innocent victim, a beautiful, selfless soul who just loved too much, and the narcissist is a malicious predator who ruined their life.
But the clinical model suggests something far more uncomfortable. Are they actually two sides of the exact same coin?
Yes. According to the psychodynamic models we are referencing, they exist on the exact same codependent spectrum.
Both the narcissist and the empath experienced what psychologists call the attachment authenticity bind in childhood.
It works like this. Every single human infant needs attachment to their caregiver to literally survive. But as they grow, they also need the freedom to develop their authenticity, to become their own person.
When parents are neglectful, overly critical, narcissistic themselves, or use conditional love, the child is presented with a terrifying subconscious choice.
If I am my authentic self, my parent withdraws love, I lose my attachment, and I die.
So they learn it is inherently unsafe to be authentic. To keep the attachment, they sever their connection to their true self.
And from that initial severing, that core wound of toxic shame, the deep-seated belief that who I truly am is fundamentally flawed and not enough, the spectrum splits into two different survival strategies.
Exactly. On one end of the spectrum, you have the falsely empowered codependent. This becomes the narcissist.
They hide their agonizing toxic shame behind dominance, control, or, as we discussed with a covert narcissist, a heavily guarded defensive facade of victimhood and perceived superiority.
They are absolutely terrified of vulnerability because vulnerability means exposure. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the disempowered codependent. This is the empath.
They hide their core shame behind relentless people-pleasing, self-sacrifice, and caretaking.
They both run what trauma specialist Kenny Weiss calls the worst day cycle. Trauma leads to fear, fear leads to shame, and shame leads to denial.
They're both living in complete denial of their core wounds by hiding behind their survival personas.
And here's the truly uncomfortable revelation for the highly empathic person listening right now. How does the empath use moral superiority as a weapon?
This is perhaps the most challenging concept in the recovery process, but it's the key to actual freedom.
The empath often constructs an identity around their suffering. They say, I am continually targeted by these toxic people because I am so nice, I am so loving, I'm so selfless.
Now, while those traits are genuinely present, using them as an inflexible identity is a defense mechanism.
By claiming to be the ultimate giver, the ultimate healer, the person who is just too good and too pure for this cruel world, the empath subtly elevates themselves above the narcissist.
It is, ironically, a covert form of narcissistic-like superiority.
So instead of the narcissist saying, I'm better than you because I'm smarter, the empath is silently saying, I am better than you because I care more. I am morally superior because I bleed for you.
Wow. Think about what that does for the empath psychologically. It grants them a profound sense of false power.
It allows them to completely avoid facing their own core wound of powerlessness and self-abandonment.
As long as they remain hyper-focused on being the innocent victim of someone else's pathology, they never have to look in the mirror.
They never have to ask, why am I compulsively abandoning my own boundaries? Why do I believe I have to endure abuse to earn love?
At their core, both partners in this dynamic are trying to be the parent they never had. They are both trying to heal their own childhood shame through the other person.
It's like two drowning people trying to use each other as a life raft, but one is made of lead and the other is made of sponges.
That is such a visceral image. Let's look at the actual mechanics of how this relationship plays out in real time. We are talking about parasitic entrainment. or the complete hijacking of the empath's nervous system.
The research outlines a very predictable timeline. Love bombing, intermittent reinforcement, devaluation, discard, and hoovering.
Let's break down the unconscious psychological mechanism during that initial intoxicating phase, love bombing.
When they first meet, the covert narcissist, or what some researchers in the dark triad literature call a dark empath, deploys a strategy called customized mimicry.
Remember our distinction between effective and cognitive empathy. Covert narcissists and dark empaths possess high cognitive empathy, but low to non-existent affective empathy.
Meaning, they can intellectually read you like a book. They can analyze your microexpressions, they know exactly what you're thinking, but they don't actually feel your pain.
It's data to them, not emotion.
Precisely. Because the covert narcissist leads with vulnerability, they use their high cognitive empathy to logically scan the empath. They look for the empath's specific emotional scars.
Did the empath have a critical father? An emotionally absent mother? The narcissist figures it out.
And then they meticulously mimic the exact vulnerability needed to trigger the empath's deep-seated caregiving compulsion.
They don't present as strong. They present as the perfectly broken bird that only the empath has the unique power to heal.
And what does that do to the empath's brain? Their hyperactive mirror neurons lock on to this customized, mathematically precise distress.
It creates what the literature calls neurological entrainment. You are literally syncing the rhythms of your nervous system to their feigned vulnerability.
It feels like magic. It feels like you have finally met your soulmate, the one person who truly gets you.
But it is a neurological illusion. Once the empath is fully hooked, once their nervous system is entangled, the covert narcissist abruptly shifts to intermittent reinforcement.
The warmth, the deep late-night conversations, the vulnerability, it is suddenly withdrawn. It is replaced by the stealth tactics we discussed earlier.
Stonewalling, sudden coldness, passive aggression, and subtle devaluations.
And we talked about the slot machine analogy earlier, but let's look at what that actually does to your brain chemistry.
If you go to a casino and play a slot machine that pays out every single time you pull the lever, you'd get bored and walk away.
If you play a machine that literally never pays out, you'd give up and walk away.
But the machine is programmed to pay out just randomly enough to keep you obsessed.
When the narcissist withdraws their affection, it triggers a survival panic in the empath. It creates massive biochemical spikes of cortisol and adrenaline.
Your body thinks it's dying. So the empath goes into overdrive, people-pleasing, apologizing, trying to fix whatever they supposedly did wrong.
Desperately chasing the rare jackpot of dopamine and affection they received during the love bombing phase.
This dynamic creates what I call the mirror neuron paradox. The empath's nervous system becomes entirely externally regulated.
Because their mirror neurons are hypersensitized to tracking the narcissist's ever-shifting moods to stay safe, they completely suppress their own internal safety signals.
They stop listening to their gut. They stop feeling their own exhaustion. The empath essentially becomes a biological host for a parasitic dynamic.
The covert narcissist uses the empath to regulate their own toxic shame, literally dumping their anxiety, anger, and self-loathing onto the empath.
While the empath willingly depletes their own physiological and emotional resources to absorb it.
The empath believes that if they just love hard enough, if they just absorb enough of the poison, the narcissist will finally heal and the love bombing phase will return permanently.
But they won't, because the narcissist's false self doesn't want healing. Healing requires vulnerability and accountability, which equals death to the false self.
The false self requires endless supply, so the cycle inevitably moves to devaluation, where those stealth tactics systematically erode whatever self-worth the empath has left.
Then comes the discard, which usually happens either when the narcissist secures a new source of supply or when the empath is so thoroughly drained, so sick and exhausted, that they can no longer function as a mirror.
And finally, hoovering. Months or years later, the narcissist tries to suck the empath back in with fake apologies and promises of change, solely to reestablish control and see if the supply tap still works.
And this cycle will repeat indefinitely, ruining decades of people's lives unless the fundamental underlying trauma schema is addressed.
Which brings us to the most vital part of this deep dive. How do we break the mirror? How do we transition from the worst day cycle to the authentic self cycle?
This is where we have to look inward. Why does this pattern repeat? Why do so many incredibly smart, highly empathic people find themselves going from one narcissistic partner to the next over and over again?
The sources are uncompromising on this point. As long as you identify purely as the innocent victim whose sensitivity is just a random genetic curse, you will never examine the childhood trauma that caused your hypervigilance in the first place.
And this is exactly where a massive amount of online narcissism recovery content completely fails victims and actually keeps them trapped.
If you spend hundreds of hours on YouTube or forums analyzing the abuser, trying to figure out if they are a somatic narcissist or a cerebral, covert narcissist, obsessively decoding their every text message.
You are still externally focused. You are still abandoning yourself.
It's true, you are still running your childhood survival strategy. Your brain is saying, if I can just understand their pathology perfectly, I will finally be safe.
But it doesn't work. The abuser's brain is a black hole. You will never find the bottom of it.
So, if our empathy is a beautiful capacity, and it is, effective empathy is the glue of human connection and deep intimacy, but it's being weaponized against us, how do we protect it?
How do we break free without becoming cynical, cold, or narcissistic ourselves?
The profound, deeper lesson from the trauma literature is that true healing requires grief. The empath must grieve the illusion.
They must radically accept that their compulsive caretaking, their endless patience, their absolute self-sacrifice failed to produce genuine reciprocity.
They cannot fix the narcissist. No amount of love can cure a false self.
And to do that, they have to drop the moral superiority we talked about.
That is the hardest step. They must drop the survival persona of the selfless healer and shift their brilliant, hyper-attuned focus entirely inward.
Healing involves establishing rigorous, non-negotiable boundaries.
And let me be clear, setting those boundaries will feel incredibly uncomfortable, even terrifying at first, because to your inner child, saying no meant losing love and risking abandonment.
But most importantly, the empath must heal their original shame wound. They must learn to tolerate the intense discomfort of their own emotions rather than constantly regulating the emotions of others to feel safe.
They have to reprogram their nervous system to believe that they are inherently worthy of love simply for existing, not just for what they can provide, what they can fix, or how much pain they can absorb.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? We have traveled deep into the neurobiology of mirror neurons and emotional contagion.
We've exposed the stealth tactics of the covert narcissist, from withholding care to spoiling joy.
We've mapped the shared childhood wounds of toxic shame and confronted the deeply uncomfortable reality of the codependent spectrum. We've deconstructed the human magnet syndrome, piece by piece.
The overarching takeaway from all of this clinical data is that your sensitivity is not a curse. But when it is operating blindly as an unhealed trauma response, it acts as a massive homing beacon for those who need an emotional host to survive.
Understanding the stark clinical and neurological reality of this dynamic is the first necessary step in dismantling it.
You cannot outlove a false self. You cannot heal someone else's toxic shame by absorbing it into your own nervous system.
I want to leave you with one final lingering revelation to carry with you. We talked in the beginning about how dealing with a covert narcissist feels like being trapped in a room with a funhouse mirror, constantly distorting your reality, making you look crazy, making you feel small.
The ultimate rebellion against a covert narcissist isn't to out-manipulate them.
It isn't to write a 10-page letter exposing them publicly. It isn't even to figure out the exact, precise clinical label for what is broken inside their brain.
The ultimate rebellion is to realize that you are the one holding the mirror.
When you finally do the work to heal the deep childhood shame that told you your only value was in saving others, the mirror shatters. And for the first time in your life, out of the reflection of someone else's pathology, you get to meet your authentic self.
It is a profound, life-altering shift, moving your energy from managing someone else's pathology to fiercely nurturing your own well-being.
Understanding your own psychology, the developmental origins of your empathy, and the neurological nature of your trauma responses is the true, lasting key to breaking the cycle forever.
Thank you for joining us on this journey in today's deep dive.
Remember, the path out of the woods doesn't start by analyzing the wolves. It starts with looking inward and finding your own compass. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time.